Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah.
Another episode of Trash Talk. I'm Damian Hill. With me, as always, is TJ O'Connor. Tonight, we are joined by Sean Lucky McPadden. This is a discussion to, I guess, go over what defines the greatest of all time. It's the GOAT. I mean, the best of all time, the best in the division. Everybody makes this argument for all of their favorite fighters all the time, and I thought it was a sub that Trash Talk could go over, especially with Sean McPadden, who's trying to define himself as the greatest of all time himself, you know? So before we do get into it, Trash Talk is brought to you again by Valhalla Combat Sports Incorporated, Ink Shrink Tattoo out in New Brighton, Minnesota, Origin Wellness CBD, the Striking Institute, Spartan Martial Arts, James Clark's Sports Psychology and Hypnosis Therapy, The Fighters, and TJ's mom. How you doing tonight, Sean?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Oh, I can't.
And and as always, I'm doing a whole lot better than TJ.
Yeah.
I get this is one of those conversations where I guess it could go on forever and ever, but I guess just to draw out the outlines or the basic outlines for what a lot of people define as the greatest of all time. Sometimes you have a guy who's the longest reigning championship in a division. People want to call them the greatest of all times. Sometimes people want to call somebody who's undefeated for a number of years and barely has any losses or no losses at all, the greatest of all time. Sometimes people want to say that it was just I can't this is the hardest one to define, where a guy loses, bounces back, comes back, and then stays champion for a long period of time and being the greatest of all time. And then some define it as just literally retiring champion or undefeated. And I don't know if any of those are right. I don't know. How do you feel about it, Sean?
I think what defines being a GOAT is not just winning, but winning in dominant fashion over a long, extended period of time and with very legitimate, super tough competition. I personally, in my mind, you have a three-way kind of battle for that spot, being between George St. Pierre, Demetrius Johnson, and John Jones. Okay. John Jones is tricky. Yep. He's got the drugs. He's got all the outside shit going on. He's even been popped for steroids. That being said, he might have been popped for steroids, but he was doing, he was on coke benders, fighting guys all over the weekend, still kicking their ass. I mean, he finished everybody and anybody. And that alone, he stays in. George St. Pierre reigned among, the 170-pound division for such a long time. He's got to be just in there. I think George fought a little – well, I don't even want to say he fought a little safe, I guess. He fought his style. But you could tell towards the later portion of his career that he was, the Johnny Hendricks fight, for instance, he was starting to get touched up a little bit. He was starting to fall off the ladder. So it's tough.
Okay. But before we go any further, this is just one of those things where, me and TJ have talked about this multiple times off camera. But when a guy is the greatest of all time is, in my mind, it's probably going to end up being GSP once we look at everything, lined up. I mean, compared to what everybody else compares the greatest of all time to, GSP is definitely either number one or the greatest of all time. But in my mind, just basing it off of what I like to see and guys that I know are real, Robbie Lawler is the greatest of all time in my eyes. This dude is willing to fight anybody at any time, no matter rank or title contention or anything like that. He's willing to prove himself to be the best of all time, you know? And he's fought in all of these guys. He's taken some losses and then he's bounced back and still made his way to the UFC welterweight championship of the world. Even with all those losses, even with all those setbacks, and still managed to set himself apart. I count him in my mind as one of the greatest of all times. And when I've made this argument before, it's always come back to, oh, he's the greatest journeyman of all times, which I feel like is really fucking disrespectful. But at the same time, I do understand the argument behind that. But when I'm trying to define the greatest of all time, I'm looking at a guy who's willing to fight anybody, because if you're the greatest of all time, you should be willing to fight anybody, right? You should be able to defend that greatest of all time title to anybody. But then at the same time, I guess we have time limits on our career. Let's say I'm the best that I'm ever going to be, where I'm considered to be in the running for greatest of all time, but my limit is only 5 years. And in those 5 years, I get so many wins and so many things, but then I continue to fight on past those 5 years where I'm the greatest of all times, and then I start to lose. But then there's another guy who has the same window of opportunity as me to be the greatest of all times. They stop fighting after that 5-year window. They retire with that perfect record or with a whole lot more wins than losses. And I guess that's how a lot of people kind of consider, and they compare what makes the greatest of all time. Like if Anderson Silva would have retired the welterweight champion of the world over Chris Weidman before that fight ever happened, and he retired, we'd be probably debating Anderson Silva over GSP. Now, I start to think about it. Am I taking Anderson Silva's recent losses in consideration with my comparison to him and GSP? I know that took a whole long time to fucking get out of my mouth and to make those comparisons and say those things, but like when those things are said, does it change the aspect at all in your mind, or does it just raise more questions to who it could be?
No, it definitely does. Change the aspect, or how I think about it, and I think Anderson definitely is another one of those guys that should be considered, the GOAT, because again, he reigned his division with such dominance and beat everybody who was anybody, and finished them. So it's like, and not just finished them, but embarrassed half of them while doing it. So it's like, it's tough. I mean, that's why I think, that's why for me personally, GSP just isn't that guy. I think he was the best of his time. He was dominant, but he wasn't that finisher. And I mean, in MMA, the finish is everything. We all know that. We don't get paid. We don't get paid for going, 15 minutes. We get paid for the time we're in there to, whether it's 3 minutes or 15 minutes or 25 minutes, I'm getting paid the exact same amount. I want to get in. I want to get out. I want to get paid. And that's why I think DJ, Anderson, John Jones, those are the guys who you got to talk about.
Yeah. And I think it's such a broad subject. Like when Damian said, I mean, you can make those opinions and go, Robbie Lawler, and you can make an argument for that. And I think in the traditional sense, when people think the greatest of all time, like you guys said, you think of win, you think of getting your hand raised and doing it for a long time, but there's so much that goes into it. I mean, it's really a mixture of things. You have to win. Yeah. You have to win impressively. Yeah. People have to want to watch you fight. You have to be able to promote yourself. I mean, these are things all come together, because you can be the best guy ever, and if no one wants to watch you fight, tough break, man. I mean, it's just one of those things where, if you're not moving the needle, that has to play a factor as well. And that's why, I'm just saying this just to say it, but like, it's not my opinion, but that's why when you hear people bring up greatest of all time, you'll hear names like guys that promote like Floyd or Conor. I mean, Floyd's different because he's actually, very technical, but you hear stuff like that, but it's that's a factor, but I think winning's way more important.
Let's get into the Floyd Mayweather aspect because I like the way you ended that and the way you brought that up. But you said obviously winning is the most important. And Floyd Mayweather, 41-0? Is that his record?
50.
50-0.
50.
Actually, it might be 51-0. It's something.
Yeah, 51-0. I know it's Conor was the one, so it's either 41 or 51-0. Either way, but he's undefeated, multiple time world champion. How many world titles does he have? Like 12 or 16? Yeah, in between 12 or 16 world titles, beaten more world champions than anybody in professional boxing and things like that. But at the same time, people make the argument that he's boring all of the time. I mean, now when you look at a guy like who was it, Prince Nassim, who was an exciting champion, dominant form, but exciting as hell. He's also one of those guys that's in the running for greatest of all times. Definitely doesn't have the exact same record or pedigree or depth in his record or whatever with competition and former world champs, but you see his performances and it's like, oh shit, this dude's the best in the world, right? Or could be. But then you start to take into consideration that, I mean, let's just say these fighting, I guess we made it a sport. Whether it's boxing, MMA, kickboxing, or whatever, it's a sport now technically. And when you're looking at a guy who's trying to be a competitor or a martial artist, you look at guys who are trying to win. You know what I mean? Like, let's look at Kamaru Usman in his last fight against against Jorge Masvidal. It's like it was clear he was doing enough and doing what he thought that he could get done to get the win. Maybe he is more dominant than that. Maybe he is has more power than that. Maybe he has way more skills, and maybe he is better on the feet. But we don't know because he was going after the win, not necessarily the finish. You know what I mean? And does that affect him being the greatest of all time, being a competitor versus a finisher or a fighter? You know what I mean? Like the three are somewhat different. And I want to assume that all of us understand the difference. Not everybody who's listening is going to understand the difference between the three that I just said, but you guys understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. I think for me, the clear cut greatest of all time is John Jones, strictly because he would beat you at your own game. Perfect example. What he did to Daniel Cormier. Not once, but twice. I'm just saying, dude.
Yeah, well, when you take in a guy like GSP, who, like, let's say you're known for your wrestling, he might not necessarily wrestle with you. He might keep it on the feet. We did see his first fight with Josh Koscheck where he kept taking Josh Koscheck down. But you notice in the second fight, he just kind of worked that jab and stayed away from Josh until his eye swelled up so fucking big he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't even see the jab coming anymore. Now, is getting a guy out of their element and attacking them outside their element a definition of a true fighter, like a competitor? Because I'm getting you to do something that you don't necessarily want to do, but if I was to, let's say you're a striker or you're a wrestler and I beat you in wrestling and I'm like, you know what, fuck you and your wrestling, and I just shut you down with my own wrestling, like, which is the greater exclamation? Because I understand beating a guy at their own game. It's just like, yeah, I got you, bro. You're done. You can't do shit to me. But making a guy fight you on your terms is also one of those things that I also respect a lot too, because if they I don't even know where I'm next.
It's tough for me because, like, I definitely get what you're saying. Like, making guys and dragging them into your game. Usman is a perfect example. Covington's another great example. They force the fight upon you. They force their game upon you because it is so dominant and so just, it's their pace, their, them. why, again, kind of going back to John Jones does that, but he does it to your game. You know, at how many? I mean, he's outstruck the best strikers in the light heavyweight division, and he's out-grappled the best grapplers. I mean, it's just to be able to take any, because we're all specialists to some degree. You know, I'm phenomenal off my back and I got good hands, but you know, I finish basically everybody by submission. So, you know, if you look at me on paper, people are going to be like, hey, that guy's ground is super, super good, right? Which, I mean, is 100% true. I mean, when guys go to the ground with me, I usually drown them.
Yep.
John is able to do that not only with grappling, but his striking too. You know, Machida is a perfect example. When he fought Lyoto, Lyoto didn't have an answer. He just busted him up. When he fought Rashad Evans, Rashad is a great overall fighter, great power, good kicks, super athletic, phenomenal wrestler. Had nothing. Just complete and total, utter domination, no matter what. I mean, it's kind of like, it's just tough. It is, because there's the two sides of the argument, because you look at a guy like Khabib. You know what he's going to do. You train for it for 12 weeks to not let him do his thing, and he does it anyways.
100%. And
Yep.
I appreciate that transition, because we didn't even practice this, but the fight I was thinking of in my head when we were talking, and is just about your scenario, is the Conor Khabib fight. When you play your game, I mean, it's great. Everybody expects it. Everybody knew Khabib was going to take Conor down. Everybody knew his grappling was going to be better. But what are we talking about almost 2 years later? Dude, Khabib dropped him with a punch. You would have never expected that. That's the X factor. You know, he went into Conor's world and was successful in that scenario, and that's what sticks out. It's one of those weird things, and, you know, I agree with what you said, Sean. In my opinion, John Jones is the best fighter I've ever seen, and I think one of the key factors that, you know, we haven't really touched on yet is, you know, one of the factors of it is facing adversity, because John's one of those guys. He's been in bad spots. He's been in deep water, and he finds a way to win. People talk about how good John Jones is. John Jones is super athletic. His brothers are in the NFL. He's tall as shit. He has 84-inch reach. But John Jones is tougher than shit. John Jones is so tough. Vitor Belfort almost broke his arm and got out of it.
That broken toe. Can we just talk about the broken toe real quick?
Toe with Chael.
A compound fracture. The bone was out of the skin.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the first two. I mean, that whoop in the first round he took with Gustafson. I mean, he has been in deep water. And we say these things, and if you say these things about 90% of everybody else, it's going to be followed by, you know, it's a tough night that night. You know, he'll be back. But John finds a way to win when the lights are bright, and that's why he's the greatest I've ever seen.
Let me just say something, because I said earlier that, in my opinion, Robbie Lawler is the greatest of all times, and it's because of his ability to bounce back after a loss, his ability, the fact that he climbed back and everything. But yeah, you brought up a really fucking interesting point, TJ. Facing adversity in the fight and coming back and winning. Granted, Robbie Lawler has done that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. John Jones has done it and remained undefeated, minus that one disqualification.
Yeah. And what's crazy is we talk about this with such finality, and that's what's great about sports is, you know, John Jones is the best, but, you know, in 10, 15, 20 years from now, there's going to be another guy, and we're going to be those old guys arguing with our kids. Nah, that dude didn't have shit for John Jones. Nah, Conor would have boxed that guy's face off, and we're going to be those guys. But deep down, you're going to have to understand that the game truly is evolving. And in 10, 15 years, there's going to be a guy that makes John Jones look elementary. And it's just a fact.
Let me just jump on that real quick, because we have it with Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali. You know what I mean? Like, where people make that comparison all the time. We're like, who would have won? Who would have won? Two completely different styles, both very dominant champions, both guys that regain titles, and it's just like they're two completely different fighters and styles. 100%. I can't say that that Mike Tyson is better than Muhammad Ali. And I wouldn't necessarily say that Muhammad Ali is better than Mike Tyson. Like, you want to know who knows more about the sport, or who displayed more about the sport, or whatever. I guess you could make the argument Muhammad Ali displayed more, but Mike Tyson didn't have to.
Yeah.
And he also showed that he could display other skills as well. So it's just like, when people compare guys that are fought in different generations, it's hard to even make the comparison, especially when we're talking about the greatest of all time, because you're talking about two guys or multiple guys that didn't fight in the same time as each other, had different skill sets, fought different guys. Because let's look at the middleweight division right now. The middleweight division, I feel, is the most dangerous it's ever fucking been in the UFC right now. You know, Yoel Romero, Israel Adesanya, Kevin Gastelum, Robert Whittaker. There's multiple fucking guys, you know. But then you had Anderson Silva.
Jacare. There's monsters.
Hey, don't forget Jared
Monsters. It's the tough. Exactly. It's my point being, it's the toughest it's ever been right now. Yeah. But when Anderson Silva was running and killing the middleweight division, and also going up to light heavyweight, you know, and Anderson Silva still in the argument of being the greatest of all times, was he facing the same level of competition that exists today? And that's always an argument that's going to exist when you're bringing up the greatest of all time. Are they competing against the same level of athlete? And that's where I guess that's kind of where we're going to lose a lot of people. We're like, it's just, I mean, if they're not competing against the same level of competition, then you can't necessarily say that they're the greatest of all time. But at the same time, let's say, Sean, you're going through and you're destroying everybody you fight against, and they're all undefeated. Everybody you fight, and you're killing all of them. I'm going to say, well, Sean's not really facing anybody that tough because you just beat him that good. You know what I mean? Is that what I'm doing with, I'm asking right now, is that what I'm doing with Anderson Silva when he was reigning as champion? Or am I taking everything wholesale? Like, I'm accepting the fact that Anderson Silva was as good as he was, but the middleweight division is just that much better now.
I think it's looking at an opponent's skill level today and then comparing it to the past. And this is where I would say John Jones loses a lot of credibility for that GOAT title, because, you know, he was beating guys like Gus, who's a monster, obviously, but Gus put him through hell. You know, TRT, Vitor Belfort, put him through hell. Eventually got that finish, but he had to work for it. You know, you got guys like Anthony Rumble Johnson, you know, DC. I mean, you got DC, who is a double champ. That's got to hold a lot of respect. He's also an Olympian. That holds a ton of respect. Gus was the number 2 guy for ever. I mean, the only guys he lost to were John and Rumble. So it's like, but then you throw in guys like Demetrius Johnson, you see the skill level at the flyweight division. Like, it was still legit. I mean, those were the best flyweights in the world at that point in time. I mean, and nobody could touch Demetrius. But yeah. I guess where I kind of lose it with Anderson is, you know, Anderson, you know, is defending against guys, and nothing against Forrest Griffin or Stephan Bonner or, you know, any of those old super solid, even like Shogun and all those other guys that Anderson fought. Nothing against those guys, but there's a difference in athleticism and a difference in technical ability that's being showcased in the middleweight division these days versus the old days. I thought Robert Whittaker was one of them, was getting up there for GOAT, because that dude, I mean, he held off Yoel Romero for 50 minutes. Bruh. Whew. But, you know, then Whittaker gets taken out by Izzy. And Izzy is looking like the reigning guy for a while, but he's got to fight Costa, and Costa's a freaking savage. So what's going to happen in that fight, and Costa's got better cardio than Romero. Costa's going to come at Izzy and not going to give him that space. Is Izzy going to be able to handle that kind of pressure? What's going to happen? Whitaker tried to put that kind of pressure on Izzy, though, and Whitaker got pieced up. So is Costa going to be able to walk through shots like that? Because, he walked through Romero's shots, too. So it's like there's so much you can throw into the argument, and there's so many different details, and there's so much. But I guess the question is in simple. I'm taking the level of technical ability, athleticism, and just raw fighter, and comparing that, past and present of opponents of these selected GOAT candidates.
Yeah. Fuck, dude. I honestly, that's a perfect comparison or a way to wrap it up for your answer, because I'm still sticking with Robbie Lawler. TJ.
like I said.
Hold on. Sorry, TJ. I just called on you, but 1 second. I'm just like, and I'm basing this off of kind of the way that you wrapped it up, Sean. Like, I still believe that Robbie Lawler is, if not the greatest of all time, deserves to be in the fucking argument. And that's because of fucking, one, his performances, his grit, his skill, his determination, and the fact that he rose to world champion while being considered a fucking journeyman. Like, fucking A. Let's say, let's start off Anderson Silva with 10 losses on his record. Let's see if he climbs to world champion. I'm not saying that he couldn't. I'm just saying, like, fucking Robbie Lawler's the shit, and so is Jorge Masvidal. But Jorge Masvidal might end up surpassing Robbie Lawler in my book, depending on what happens.
I want to see Masvidal. I want to see Masvidal on a full camp, because he was stopping those takedowns in the first round. Then he started getting tired. He started leaning the defense. That's a whole different fight. Masvidal has, where I'm gonna stick to the GOAT argument, but you just like Lawler, you got just in that division alone, you have Johnny Hendricks, you have Rory McDonald, you have Carlos Condit, and if you're gonna include Robbie Lawler, you have to include Carlos Condit, because that motherfucker is the natural born killer. And you gotta throw in Donald Cerrone. You're adding so many different names when you add all these guys, who have lost fights. And that's
okay. So, like, the reason why I didn't add Donald Cerrone is only because he didn't get to the world title, and that's one of the things where we all were, I guess, what brought up the question, and ultimately is like, what defines the greatest of all time, And I'm including Robbie Lawler simply because he won the world title. And honestly, I feel like I disrespected the fuck out of Carlos Condit because I didn't mention his fucking name, dude. Oh my God. I'm glad that you said that, because I feel like a piece of shit.
I love watching them WEC fights back in the day where he was like young Hunter. That was just what was up.
Okay. I'm going to bring up a new question before we wrap this all up, because I feel like we're getting to the closure of all of this or whatever. And, but okay. The interim title, they say doesn't hold any weight, or at least when Carlos Condit won it, no one gave him credit for being the fucking champion, Well, the thing is, in my eyes, is that everybody that's interim champion nowadays, if a fighter's out for a week, they give somebody else a fucking interim title or whatever, right? And I'm like, all right, I'm fine with that, but that guy gets counted as a real champion. When Carlos Condit won his interim title, they weren't giving it out just as easy, right? And Carlos Condit, the thing is about I guess professional football, any professional sport. Let's say a guy's injured, and you have a game set that day. Well, guess what? You can't play with that guy. If you guys lose that day, then you fucking lose the game. Let's say Tom Brady's out of the fucking Super Bowl and you still have to play the Super Bowl on that day with your backup quarterback. If you lose, the other team is still the Super Bowl champions. It doesn't matter that you were injured or not. Now, let's say a champion in MMA is injured and they're supposed to defend their title. Well, you can't force them to fight injured. That's what makes the sport different. You can't force them to fight different or force them to fight injured. So you can either find a replacement fighter for an interim title, or you could strip that person of their title, because that's what would happen. Let's say the two teams that are meant to meet up in the Super Bowl or for the NCAAs or for the fucking NBA finals and shit or whatever, the two teams that are supposed to meet up and one team can't show up, the other team's going to get announced the fucking winner, right? You know?
Yeah,
So in MMA, they erase that. They either find a replacement or the fight gets canceled. Now, let's say with Carlos Condit, if GSP was injured and he wasn't able to fight or whatever, right? Let's say it was just like every other sport where you're forced to compete on that day no matter what. GSP's forced to fight Carlos Condit, and GSP's injured and Carlos Condit wins. Now what? Does that change? Does that change the interim title?
Completely.
People's opinions?
No.
Definitely. Exactly. It definitely changes.
It's tough. I
everything.
want to throw somebody else's name. I think Henry Cejudo deserves to be in there too. And then also Dominic Cruz. What would this, argument be like if Dominic Cruz wasn't out for 4 or 5 years in his prime? Because let's be honest, I mean, Dominic Cruz reigned the 135 division for 4 years, and he didn't even fight.
Yeah, dude, and he came back when you talk about
Zaki, bro, no ring rust. See, you remember
exactly
Mitsugaki after a 4-year layoff? I think he beat him in like 90 seconds. Fifth ranked guy in the world, ragdolled him. Then went on the next fight, beat Dillashaw.
Yeah.
So I mean, I almost feel like we need to include him in there too. Because I mean,
dude, okay. TJ knows this. TJ knows this, but I've said this to him multiple times. Where Dominic Cruz, I mean, my favorite fighter of all times. There's I don't know why I don't include him in the greatest of all time. I don't know why I didn't include him. He is my favorite fighter of all times, but Robbie Lawler is the guy. There's nobody I respect in this game more than Robbie Lawler.
And I agree. Robbie has more heart and more grit than arguably anybody in the sport. I just don't think he has the record to back up that title. I mean, because to be perfectly honest, I think if Robbie and Khabib fought, even when Robbie was, in his younger age, or even let's call Robbie's prime, Khabib still wins.
Yep.
Because Khabib is just fucking Khabib. It's like,
Khabib had 0 takedowns in one of his UFC fights against Gleison Tibau. You know that, right?
I do know that.
Yeah, and I'm just like, and I'm not saying that Khabib isn't one of the greatest of all times, but when you see a guy who wants to go out there and execute his game plan, like some people still, because I had rewatched that fight recently or whatever, some people still think that Gleison Tibau won that fight. Now, I'm not even going to go into all of that or whatever, right? But what I will go into is the fact that, let's say a guy wants to go out there and execute their game plan specifically, and they can't do it. And Gleison Tibau shut him down. If there was other judges that day or that night, and Gleison got called the winner, would Khabib even be in the conversation, right? Yeah, with the same performance, would he be in the same conversation with that same performance if it would have ended up as a loss?
I think so, strictly because you look at Lomachenko. if you don't consider Lomachenko one of the greatest boxers to ever bless the ring, I just think you're wrong. Just flat out wrong. You watch the Salido fight. Yeah, he lost, but I mean, Salido played a pro game. He did. He played the amateur. He said, "Hey, welcome to the pros. I mean, I'm gonna punch you in the balls and I'm gonna low blow you 30, 60 times. I'm gonna make sure the ref don't see it." That's what caused the loss, obviously. One loss, I don't think takes you out of the conversation, but like once you're past that like 5 mark for me, it just kills it. I think you've lost too many times. You've had, I don't want to say, too many shots isn't what I want to say. I don't know.
Hold on, let me ask this. Let's say were the losses, does it change in your mind if the losses came early on in the career versus later on in the career? Like let's say they're undefeated for the middle portion of their career. They had a couple losses early on, and then they had a few losses after. You know what I mean? Like after that middle range, does it change for you? Or like let's say if DC all of a sudden takes 5 losses and he's 41 now.
Yep.
Does
I mean
that change? I'm
10. I don't think it would though. Personally, for me, I'm looking at where are these guys at in their primes. Robbie, when he had the title, defended it. He wasn't. He had to go to war and he had to show a lot of heart, a lot of grit. But he wasn't like getting guys. Like he had to go to war with them. I got a lot. I love.
There was
Robbie.
no easy win, Robbie.
No, there was no easy wins. I felt bad for the guy. I mean, you just
I get what you're
allowed to fight one time a year. We fight of the year, but you got one fight a year. The head can't take it.
Yeah. Well, dude, I love.
You want to take
brought it up earlier. I'm sorry. I'm like you brought it up earlier when it comes into the winning consistently and dominance. I believe that's what you said or whatever. But like how you win and things like that. Like yes, like that right now makes a whole lot of fucking sense. And sorry, continue.
It's I just feel like taking those guys who are in the conversation who in their prime and comparing the level of opponents they were fighting. That's why I think Henry Cejudo needs to be in this conversation big time. Because I mean, I think he did it. He got out at 32. Personally, I want to get out at 32. But dude, I mean, what a pair. He beat Demetrius Johnson. He beat TJ Dillashaw. He beat Marlon Moraes. He beat like just those 3 names alone. Whew.
Okay, so this is one of those things that kind of brought up one of the things of greatest of all time. Let's say Henry Cejudo is definitely in the running in my eyes, but like let's just take into this aspect too. And I know we got to wrap this up soon because TJ has to get back inside. And I'm sorry, TJ, but Henry Cejudo won the title from Demetrius Johnson, and it was a controversial win, and there was no rematch given. There was that trade that happened and all of that stuff or whatever, right? That taints it just a little bit for me, just a little. And I'm not saying that it doesn't mean that he's not the greatest of all time or anything, but it just taints it. I would love to see that rematch even still to this day. But let's take into consideration of Anderson's fighting all of the best in his weight class and at 205, destroying them all the way up until he fought Chris Weidman, right? Now, let's say he retired before he fought Chris Weidman, right? Or not even before he fought Chris Weidman. Let's go 3 or 4 title defenses before he even met Chris Weidman. Would he still be considered the greatest? Because some people are saying that Henry Cejudo is afraid of the next level of competition that is coming up in the ranks right now, and that's why he retired, leaves the game. And I'm not saying that this is the reason. I'm just saying that this. I mean, an argument that should be listened to or should be heard is that He leaves the game before all of these other guys come up, and now he has what 3 years of a title run. Yeah, 3 years of a 3 years of a title run in his books or whatever, right?
Yep.
But Anderson Silva or GSP were champion for 7 to 10 years.
No, it's true. And Demetrius,
Now,
13 straight title wins, I think it was.
exactly. So does that change the argument for Henry Cejudo? And I'm not necessarily saying specifically for you or whatever. I'm just saying, like, when that is brought up compared to longer title runs versus like a guy who just became champion, had 3 or 4 title defenses, and then got out of the game, and then didn't stick around to defend their title. Yeah, he's at the perfect age. He's at the prime age. He's 33, 32, 33, and what the prime ends, when you're 35, 38. So let's say he has 2 or 3 more years left. Let's say he competes for these 2 or 3 more years. Does he stay undefeated in those 2 or 3 years with the next level of competition that's continuing to come up? And if he does stay active and doesn't retire right now, and he takes some losses, does that change the argument for you?
No, it absolutely would. Anytime anytime one of these candidates takes a loss, it 100% changes the argument. And I would love to see. I think a guy who's got a chance at becoming GOAT is Corey Sandhagen, because he brings a very unique game, and he's fabulous everywhere. I just, we have yet to see what he can really feel like.
This is literally going to be the last thing I say, and TJ, I'm going to let you wrap it up. I'm going to let you ask the last few questions and all of that stuff, but I'm just going to say this right now. Let's say I, Damian Hill, went 1-0 as a professional fighter and then retired and said that I'm the GOAT because my first professional fight, I knocked the guy out in 4 seconds. I'm the greatest of all time. I have the 100% win record. 4 seconds is my longest fucking fight time. 100% finish. I'm like, now, of course, the longer you fight, the more likely it is for you to lose, So like if a guy just ends his record undefeated, does that necessarily define them as the greatest of all time? Like say they're 40-0 and they retire 40-0, but there's a guy that went 40-0 before them, but they also had 10 losses. They went 40-0 and then they lost 10 times. So they're 50 or they're 40 and 10 now, but they went 40-0 at the same rate as the other person. Does that person still have an argument to be the greatest of all time?
The guy who lost 10 times, no. It's winning it's winning versus elite level competition again and again and again and again and again. I mean, like I said, Cejudo lost to DJ once, beat everybody, and then rebeat Johnson. Then he goes on to beat TJ Dillashaw. Then he goes on to beat Marlon Moraes. I think he had one more in there.
Dominic Cruz.
And then he goes on to beat Dominic. I mean, it's just like you have to respect.
And they were all of
Well,
them were finishes, right? Not Demetrius, not Demetrius, but all the title defenses were finishes. That's one thing that I do.
And I mean, like we've just mentioned a couple of those names too for candidates for the GOAT. We mentioned Dominic Cruz and we mentioned TJ Dillashaw. Dillashaw was in his prime, and I think Cruz could still really fight at that point in time. I mean, he was just coming off of winning a title versus TJ Dillashaw. I mean, and then Demetrius Johnson obviously speaks for himself. Beating the guy, whether it's on points or by finish, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think there's so much that goes into it, and I think one of the biggest things that you touched on, like when Damian said he's 1-0, one knockout. I mean, obviously you have to have a sample size there, and I think that's quite honestly one of the things that would hurt the Cejudo argument. I mean, less than 15 fights. His greatness is undeniable, but if you're going wins and losses with 2 losses, in that sample pool, I mean, that makes it a little bit different, but the way he ended it, for sure. So when you make that argument about how you finish, but if he can keep going, but, you know, I mean, one of the big things, and I was going to make the argument for Damian's scenario about the 40-0 and the 40-10 is, I mean, one of the key factors is being a smart fighter, knowing when to be done. And if you can stop at that point, that plays a huge factor as well. But, I mean, I think this is an endless topic. I think we could talk about it forever. And there's probably going to be a part 2 to this at some point in time, just because someone's going to have another opinion, and I'm sure I'll change mine. But, I mean, this has been super fun. I know Damian's apologized to me, but at this point, I want to publicly apologize to my gal, who's not going to watch this, but I can hear all hell breaking loose on the inside, and she hasn't came out and interrupted this, so that's been nice. But, Sean, I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Even though it's not the traditional episode of Trash Talk, thank the sponsors, teammates, everybody.
Hey, shout out to Hong Tai, shout out to the Academy, Iridium, Sports Agency, Accelerated Chiropractic, all the great teammates I have over at the Academy and McCoon's Martial Arts. Thank you to all of you. Hey guys, I'm going to be on UFC Fight Pass September 4th, South Dakota, Sioux City. Let's get it. Let's go.
Let's get it. 100% correct. I appreciate your time yet again, Damian. Couldn't hate you more. If you're watching, which you better be, like and subscribe below. Don't be a hoe. That was supposed to rhyme for show.
Bars.